Hello and welcome to this lecture. This is going to be a conceptual walkthrough of AWS VPC, that is Virtual Private Cloud. Every IT infrastructure has network and its configuration. AWS has its own. It is VPC. VPC helps us create the virtual network on AWS. Okay. So let us do some backward integration. We need to host EC2 instances, databases on AWS. And these servers, they need IP addresses. So how will they get the IP addresses? There has to be some mechanism in place so that these IP addresses can be created, that is generated and allocated, right? That mechanism is provided by Virtual Private Cloud VPC. So you first determine how many IP addresses you need. That is, you determine the size of your network, and on the basis of it, you finalize the CIDR block of your VPC. The biggest is /16, which gives 2 raised to 16 number of IP addresses. The usable IP addresses are 2 raised to 16 minus 5. 5 is reserved by AWS, and we need not get into the details of these. Now, a VPC can have multiple subnets. What is a subnet? A subnet is a small network within the bigger network, which is called VPC. As simple as that. So, since a subnet is also a network, it will also have its own CIDR block. Here, we have two subnets, one public and one private. The public subnet has CIDR of 10.0.10/24 and private has 10.0.0.0/24. Both will have 2 raised to 8 number of IP addresses. So the formula is 2 raised to 32 minus the mask, which is 24 in this case and 16 in case of VPC. Now, one is private subnet and the other is public subnet. What is this? For that, we need to understand what is a private IP and what is a public IP. There are many things written about private and public IPs. This is how I have always seen private and public IPs. So, somebody whose name is Michael may be known as Mike amongst his friends and family, right? But people outside his network would not know that he is Mike. They will know him by Michael. So if they need to access him, approach him, they will do that by the name Michael. But within his network of family and friends, he is Mike, right? So Mike is the private IP address, Michael is the public IP address. So private IP address is only applicable within the network. So within the VPC and subnets, private IP addresses can function. Outside it, only public IP addresses can function. As simple as that. All right. And the subnets that are private subnet are the ones wherein only private IP addresses can be allocated to EC2 instances or databases. And subnets that are public subnet, private as well as public IP addresses are allocated here. Right? So far, so good? Great. Now, let us understand what happens when a request comes in for a specific EC2 instance. It can only happen if that EC2 instance is in public subnet, because then only that EC2 instance will have public IP address, and then only it is accessible from outside world. So, it first comes to the internet gateway. Internet Gateway plays a very important role. It has a mapping of all the public and private IP addresses for all the servers inside the VPC. So it consults a table. It checks if this public address has a private IP mapping. So in this case, if the request had come for 122.6.1.1, and if its corresponding private IP is 10.0.1.6, the Internet Gateway knows that this IP address exists within this VPC. It sends the request forward to router. Router has the responsibility to route it to the EC2 instance with this IP address. That is a very high level and conceptual workflow. Now, what happens if a request is coming from inside the VPC to go out? Now, it could be from the private subnet or from the public subnet. Now, first, let us see the example of private subnet. So, an EC2 instance from a private subnet makes that request. It goes to the router first. The router consults the route table, and the route table has an entry as to what to do, what is the behavior if such request comes. In case of private subnets, this is the only entry. That is, if the destination is the CIDR block of VPC 10.0.0.0/16, target is local, that is forward inside the or route inside the VPC, one of those instances. But if the destination is anything other than the CIDR range, it doesn't know what to do. So the request doesn't go forward. So if an EC2 instance from a private subnet wants to go out of the VPC, it is not possible unless NAT gateway is used, which is out of the scope of this course. Now, what if this EC2 instance wants to access some other EC2 instance within the VPC? There are some conditions that have to be met, but conceptually it is very much possible. The route table knows that this is meant for one of the instances in the VPC. So the target is local, and then the router reroutes that request to the EC2 instance for which this request was made. Now the final workflow, wherein an EC2 instance from the public subnet makes a request to get out of the VPC to the internet. The request once again comes to the router. Router again consults the route table. If this is a public subnet, there will be an entry 0.0.0.0/0, and the target is Internet Gateway. Yeah, IGW-ID is Internet Gateway. So, and the first entry is also there. The local entry is always there. Okay. So, this router now knows that if this request is for this EC2 instance to get out of VPC into the internet, then the entry exists. It then forwards the request to Internet Gateway, and through Internet Gateway gets to the internet. That is what happens. In fact, these are the things that happen in case of VPC. There are more things, but for the purposes of this course, we will never need them. And if we understand this much, not only for this course, but for general AWS functioning, we are good. We are very good. And when we do hands-on lab, we will understand some of these concepts that we have actually tried to understand conceptually. That's it. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you in the next lesson.